So we now have the ability to pass our selected activity into our form and display it. But we've run into a problem because we've made our fields read-only. Now if we go back to Visual Studio Code and take a look at our activity form, the reason that our field is now read-only is because we've given our form inputs this value property. And because of this, React now wants to know about the values inside this particular input field. Now if we take out the value property inside here, and I just go on to view the activity again and edit, then I can now type into this field. But what I'm doing here when I'm typing directly into an HTML input is I'm modifying the actual DOM directly. Now React doesn't work with the actual DOM directly, it works with a virtual DOM, and then those changes in the virtual DOM are pushed onto the actual DOM. And when it comes to dealing with forms in React, it's slightly different to how other frameworks will deal with form inputs. We need to tell React about the changes of this input field inside the component state, and then React will then modify the virtual DOM, which will cause an update to the actual DOM. So what we need to do is we need to give each of these input fields an onChange event, update the component state for our activity, and then React will take care of updating the virtual DOM, which will then update the actual DOM so that we can see the changes in our input. It sounds a bit weird, but let's see how we deal with this. So I'm going to put the value back into the title, and what we need inside our form is a handler to handle the input changes as we're typing into the field. So let's create one. Let's say const handle input change, and what we take inside this as a parameter is the event we get from our onChange handler from our input. So I'll pass in the event, and for now I'll just give it a type of any. And inside this particular function, what we want to do is set our activity properties. And to do this, we can use our set activity function. So we'll say set activity. And what we can do is, what we want to do, in fact, is only change the activity property for the input that we're updating at this specific moment. So what we can do is we can say we can set this activity and we can spread the properties of the activity object, and then we can specify the name of the property we're updating, and in this case we'll just focus on the title property. And what we can set this to is the event.target.value. And just so that we can see what's going on, in fact, I'm just going to console.log the results of event.target.value as well. And then what we can do is we can hook up our handle input change method to the onChange handler of our form inputs, and we can say handle input change. Now if we go and take a look at the effects of what we're doing here, and I'll just head over to my browser and I'll just open up the console, and it's been a while since I've looked at this, so no doubt I've got some warnings that need cleaning up, and I do, and we'll come on to that. But let me just click on the create activity button, and if I just start typing in test, then we can see that my change handler is outputting the contents of the activity title field into my console. And if we take a look at the components, and I just search for the activity form, and we take a look at the hooks and the state object, then we should be able to see that as I type, my title property in our state gets updated. And we can see that is indeed the case. So that works great for a single input. What do we do about the rest of the inputs? Well, let's head back to VS Code. And what we can do is our event target can also access the name of the input as well. So if we give our input a name, and in this case I'll just give it a name of title, then instead of specifying title, what we can use is the bracket notation syntax for objects, and I can specify event.target.name is going to be set to event.target.value, And if I head back to VS Code, I should find that this does exactly the same thing as it did before. And if I just type in test, then we can see that we get the same result in our console as we did before. But now we've got a more generic way of accessing the different properties. So what we can also do is destructure the name and the value from our event.target object. So what I'll do is instead of this console.log, I'll just replace this with a const and pass in the name and the value and set this equal to events.target. And then, instead of specifying event.target.name, inside here I can just specify name and set this to whatever is the value. And I'll just reformat things to clean things up a bit. But now we've got a more generic way of updating our individual properties. So let's just add this same handler, and we'll do the same for all of our other inputs, and I'll just copy the onChange and the name into our other input properties. And I'll need to reformat and tidy things up, but I'm just going to paste these in for now into each different inputs and just reformat. And what I just need to do then is update the name of each of these inputs. So our text area is going to be called description, and then the category is going to be called category, and then the name for the data input is going to be date, and the city name is going to be city, and the venue is just going to be venue. And what we should find, if I go over and take a look at my application and click on create activity, I should be able to type into all of these fields. And if I take a look at the React DevTools and take a look at the activity form, and take a look at my state object, I should find that each of these fields is being updated with whatever I type inside here. So far so good. So let's head back to our VS Code, and what we also want to do is, since we're using TypeScript, we do actually want to strongly type our event parameter here as well. And if I hover over my onChange handler, I can see what this returns is a React change event for the HTML input element. So what we can do is specify that this is a change event, and this is going to bring the change event in from React. And if I take a look up here, I can see we've got the change event being brought in there. And we need to specify that this is an HTML input element. And this works fine, but our text area is not an HTML input element, so it's complaining about this particular one. Now our text area element is actually using a React form event and not a React change event. And this is where using TypeScript can become a little bit confusing when dealing with React, because our onChange event for our inputs can also be a React form event rather than a change event. So what I can do is just, instead of bringing in change events, I'm just going to bring in form events and swap change event for form event. And inside the onChange event for our text area, this is telling us it's an HTML text area element. So what I'll need to do here is specify a union type and specify HTML text area element as an alternative. And then instead of event target, what we need to use for a form event is to use event current target instead. So even though we've changed a few things here, it's actually doing exactly the same thing. And all of our inputs should work without error. And if I just go back to the browser and I'll just refresh the page again, click on create activity and just start typing into the form, we should find that our state object is being updated just as it was before. And that is indeed the case. So now we've got a form where we can input things into. So let's go ahead and create a submit function as well inside our activity form. And just above the handle input change, I'm just going to add another function called handle submit. That takes no parameters. And all we're going to do at this stage is just console.log the activity. And we'll deal with hooking this up to our application very shortly. But let's make sure that when we fill out a form and click submit, we actually get something. So this handle submit, we're going to need to assign to our form's onSubmit handler. So we're going to say onSubmit equals handle submit. And if I head back to the browser again now and just click on create activity and just highlight the console and start typing, and we're not validating or doing anything like that at the moment. If I click submit, then we should see the values output into the console. So now we've got to this stage, what we'll do next is take a look at how we can submit the form data and either create a new activity or update an activity. And we'll take a look at that next.